All right, welcome to lecture 3.2. So last time we spoke about what integers actually are, how to calculate absolute value, and so just looking at basics with negative numbers and opposites. Today we're going to be extending upon that and we're going to be doing some adding with integers. So still adding our positives together, that's still part of this. However, now we're extending upon our basic addition problems and we're adding negatives and then adding one negative to a positive number and a positive number to a negative number and vice versa. So today we're going to be looking at simplifying expressions with integers and then evaluating variable expressions with integers. Also translating word phrases to our algebraic expressions, something you should be a little bit comfortable with at this point, and then adding integers in different applications. So with this example, you can see that we have a larger positive number and we're adding a smaller negative number. So when I say large, I mean the absolute value. So the absolute value of 20 is 20. The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. So it's 10 units away from the origin or 0. So when we have a larger positive number and a smaller negative number, the plus and minus just become a subtraction. So we could rewrite this as 20 minus 10. From here, if you need to go back to our subtraction lectures, that's fine. You could line them up by column, ensuring their place values are lined up. And so 0 minus 0 will be 0, and then 2 minus 1 will be 1. And so we can see that it will equal 10. And so 20 plus negative 10 is the same as 20 minus 10. So there's not too much to that kind of example. In this next example, you can see we've got a smaller positive number and a larger negative number. Larger being as the absolute value, it's 23 units from the origin, whereas 6, which is positive, is only 6 units from the origin. So negative 23 is a smaller number in general. It is further to the left than 6. However, in terms of its absolute value, it is going to be difficult to subtract here. And so we know from the previous example that 6 plus negative 23, this will become 6 minus 23. And so in a situation where you've got this smaller positive number and a larger negative number, or you're subtracting a larger number from a smaller number, what you can do is you can find the opposite of that. And remember that our opposite notation would be our opposite operator or our negative sign in front of our term. In this case, our term is going to be a whole expression. So really we've got two terms. So ultimately what we can do is we can say the opposite of 6, which would be negative 6. And then the opposite of negative 23 would be positive 23. And so that would be the opposite expression. From here, what we would do is we want to have our 23 in front of our 6. So we want to go positive 23 minus 6. Because it's commutative, we can do this. We can just rearrange it. So we've got 23 minus 6. From here, this would be part of your subtraction and it will equal 17. Now, this is the result of having our opposite expression evaluated. So at the end, we have to do the opposite of whatever the result is. So in this case, our result is 17. So we could say negative 6 plus 23 equals 17, which is the opposite of 6 plus negative 23, which would therefore equal the opposite of 17, which would be negative 17. So a little bit confusing, but essentially what you're going to do is if you have a larger negative number added to a smaller positive number, you will then flip the signs to get the opposite expression. Rearrange if you need to evaluate the easier expression. So it's easier to evaluate negative 23 minus 6 than negative 6 plus 23. And so that will give you the opposite answer. So then you just need to flip the signs of that to get the original answer. So now we have a negative number, which is larger, added to a smaller positive number. In this case, we will just flip the signs. And so we'll find the opposite expression. So we would have the opposite of negative 15 plus 5. Here, the opposite of negative 15 would be positive 15. The opposite of positive 5 would be negative 5. Now in this case, we don't need to do any rearranging because we can subtract 5 from 15 quite easily and get 10. Therefore, the answer to our original expression must be the opposite of 10, which would be negative 10. So you can see there's one less step in this case when we have a larger negative number in front and then adding to a smaller positive number. Now we have a smaller negative number adding to a larger positive number. In this case, we don't actually need to flip the signs. What we can do is just rearrange the equation. Remember, negative 12 plus 40 is the same as 40 minus 12. And so it's easy to evaluate that there. And so 40 minus 12 equals 28. And so the original answer is still going to be 28. We didn't have to flip any signs. We didn't have to find any opposites. So this one was quite simple. So just to reiterate, if you have a larger positive number and a smaller negative number, you can just rearrange it so that you can just subtract straight away. Here we've got two negative numbers added together. And so we know that this plus and this negative become a negative. So we would have minus 4 or negative 4 minus 14. Now here, this would be the exact same case where we kind of want to find the opposite to make this easier. And so the opposite of negative 4 would then equal positive 4. And then the opposite of negative 14 would be positive 14. And so this becomes quite easy to evaluate. And so 4 plus 14 equals 18. Now, hopefully you remember that because we found the opposite expression, we found the opposite answer, which would mean this original expression would be negative 18. Let's work through a couple of problems. So 19 plus negative 47. This amounts to 19 minus 47. And so the advice that I would give you is because 19 is a smaller number than 47, the best thing that I would do would be I'd flip this around. So I'd go 47 minus 19. From there, I would then evaluate. And so 47, just to do this quickly, if you need extra steps, go back and look at the subtraction practice questions video or the subtraction lecture video. So 47 minus 19 will be 28. Now, because I flipped the signs, I would then need to go and add that negative back in front. So 19 minus 47 or 19 plus negative 47 will be negative 28. So on to the next one. This one will be a bit easier. So we've got negative 32 plus 40. The way that I would rearrange this to be would be I would put the positive number in front. So I'd get 40 and then I would subtract 32, sorry. So minus 32. So then you've got 0 minus 2. You can't do that. That would become a 3 and you'd carry, and then you get 10 minus 2, which is 8, and then 3 minus 3, which is 0. And so you would end up with positive 8. So negative 32 plus 40 equals 8. So just a quick recap. We look at our signs. So positive, negative, that means we're subtracting. From there, we can flip the signs, perform the subtraction, and then flip the signs back again, and you will get your answer. For question B, you can move, remember that they're commutative. So addition and subtraction, or addition there is commutative. And so you can put 40 plus negative 32, which would be 40 minus 32. And therefore we end up with our positive 8. Simplify negative 14 plus negative 36. So negative 14 plus negative 36. So which would be the same as negative 14 minus 36. So the way that I would do this would be I would flip the signs. And so I'd go, all right, I would then have 14. Remember, you flip the signs of both of them. Plus 36. Remember that negative 36, the opposite of that, if I flip the sign, would be plus 36. Now I just do this addition, and so I'll end up with 50. Now I need to make sure this sign gets flipped again. So it's positive 50, so it would be negative 50. So therefore, negative 14 plus negative 36 would be negative 50. Negative 5 plus 3 times negative 2 plus 7. So we need to work our brackets first before we do anything. And so -2 plus 7. This would be 7 minus 2. If we move the 7 to the front, then we get -2. And so we'd end up with 5. Now we've got -5 plus 3 times 5, which would be -5 plus 15. Now we could put the 15 in front. Remember, if it's a larger number and it's positive, we just move it to the front and we go 15 minus 5, which would then equal 10. And so ultimately this expression would evaluate to 10. Evaluate x plus 7 when x equals -2. So we have x plus 7. Now we know it's -2. Now 7 is larger than so the absolute value of 7 is larger than the absolute value of -2. So we can bring that 7 to the front and go 7 minus 2. It's the same expression. Now 7 minus 2 is a lot easier to work with than -2 plus 7, but we end up with 5. Now same thing, we set up our equation or expression. -11 is our x. -11, the absolute value of -11 is greater than 7. And so what I would do here would be I would flip my signs. And so you end up with 11 minus 7, which would be 4. Therefore, -11 plus 7 will be -4. They're opposites, right? So if they're the opposite, then the answers must be the opposite. When n equals -5, evaluate n plus 1 and then -n plus 1. So n plus 1, and we end up with n equals -5. -5 plus 1, well, we could write this as 5 minus 1, and that would be 4. Therefore, -5 plus 1, remember that's the opposite, will be -4. And so that would be -4. Now for b, now here we have -n. So we have the negative or the opposite symbol out the front. We have the -5 there. The opposite of -5 is +5 plus 1, and that becomes a simple addition, which will be 6. So just to recap on this opposite concept from above, if the absolute value of the negative number is larger than the absolute value of the positive number, then flip the signs, which is basically taking the opposite of the whole equation. Therefore, when you get some evaluated equation, so you end up here with 4, you need to flip it because you've actually got the opposite equation, which means you'll have the opposite answer. Evaluate 3a plus b when a equals 12 and b equals -30. So here we would set up our equation. So 3, 12 plus b, which would be -30. Now there's some simplifying we can do that actually doesn't have anything to do with the equation necessarily, but we can do, so leave 3, 12, but we can say plus minus, well that equals minus, so it's really -30. Now, before we do anything else, I would be checking what is 3 times 12, well it equals 36 minus 30, and this becomes a very, very easy evaluation, which will just be 6. So there's no special tricks we need to do there because the number that's subtracting the other number is just larger, and this becomes a basic subtraction problem. Evaluate x plus y squared when x equals -18 and y equals 24. So first we want to set up, and I'll use square brackets because we'll have multiple brackets here. So our x plus our y, now this whole thing squared, and x will be -18 and y will be 24. So the first step here is to calculate what is -18 plus 24. Remember, 24 is greater than the absolute value of 18 or -18. And so therefore we can move this 24 to the front. So we can get 24. Now this just becomes a subtraction. That whole thing would be squared. 24 minus 18 will be 6. Now it needs to be squared still. And then 6 squared will be 36. And so that's how you would evaluate that one. Translate and simplify the sum of -9 and 5. So this should be super familiar from our addition lectures. So if you need to go back and revise there, go have a look. So -9 plus 5 is how we would simplify that. Now, because the absolute value of -9 is greater than the absolute value of +5, we would then need to flip our signs. So this would become 9 minus 5, which would equal 4. Therefore, -9 plus 5 will equal -4. Translate and simplify. The sum of 8 and -12 increased by 3. So just quickly, looking at this section here, it's a terrible one, but 8 and -12 would be this. 8 plus -12. So therefore, we would flip our signs and bring our larger number to the front. So we'd end up with 12 minus 8, which would be 4. And so really the sum of 8 and -12 would then be 4, and we're adding it by 3. And so the way that you would work this out would be, I would calculate this on the side, or if you're past this stage and you can just use your calculator, use your calculator, but you should have a sound understanding of how to do this by hand. And so to write the actual expression itself, we would translate it like this. So we're calculating the sum first, and then we're adding 3, so increasing by 3. Then, based on our calculations over here, we would end up with 4 plus 3, which would then equal 7. The temperature in Brisbane, Queensland one morning started at 7 degrees below Celsius. By noon, it had warmed up 12 degrees. What was the temperature at noon? Okay, so we started at 7 degrees below Celsius, and then later on in the day, it warmed up 12 degrees. What was the temperature at noon? So we could say our temp at noon, let's use our variable. So maybe we use t, lowercase t, equal temp at noon. Therefore, we could say t is equal to, now how do we set up this equation? So we would say -7 was our starting point. Remember, it was 7 degrees below 0, and we're warming it up by 12 degrees. Now, if we were going to do this, I would then flip our 12 out the front because it's larger, subtract 7, which would then mean that the temperature was 5 degrees Celsius at noon, which is very, very cold. And so to answer this as a worded answer, you could say the temperature at noon after warming up by 12 degrees from -7 degrees was 5 degrees. Something like that. A rugby team gained possession of the ball on their own 42-meter line. Over the next 3 plays, they lost 6 meters, then gained 4 meters, and then lost 8 meters. On what meter line did they finish up after those 3 plays? I would say let line, or let L equal line, lowercase l. So therefore L equals, and that is a lowercase l, equals, and so they started at 42 meters. So that would be our starting point. Then they lost 6 meters. Remember, losing means subtract. Then they gained 4 meters, so that would be 4. And then they lost another 8 meters. And so this actually isn't too bad of a question. So you can just calculate from left to right, and you could say 42 minus 6 is going to be 36, plus 4 minus 8. So then I would go 36 plus 4, which is equal to 40, minus 8. And then 40 minus 8 is equal to 32. And so therefore you could say something similar to, after the next 3 plays, they ended on the 32-meter line. Something similar to that. So the rugby team finished at the 32-meter line after the 3 plays. So something nice and simple, but that does answer the question. Awesome. So that brings us to the end of adding integers. So some key takeaways are, a lot of the time you will need to either move the larger number out the front and then use subtraction. Even though we're adding integers, a lot of the time you will end up with subtraction. The other thing we can do is find, rather than working with negatives and positives, we're better off flipping or finding the opposite of the whole equation. And so that means that we want to flip it and have us working primarily in the positives where we can. And then we just need to remember to flip that answer to get back to our original problem's answer. Awesome. Next time we'll come back, we'll be looking at subtracting integers.